No pace reflective, warm, authoritative yet gentle, measured, reassuring, deep understanding of emotional content, British accent, soothing timbre, perfect for healing and introspection topics, speaks with quiet conviction and wisdom. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that settles in your chest when you finally realize the confusion you have been carrying was never yours to begin with. You spent months, maybe years, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You replayed conversations, adjusted your tone, softened your edges, and walked carefully around invisible lines that kept moving. You told yourself that if you just communicated better, showed more patience, or loved more quietly, the tension would ease. But the tension never eased. It only shifted. And then came the moment you saw it clearly. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a rough patch. It was a design. You were placed in a situation where your dignity was meant to be the price of someone else's comfort. The setup was never about fairness. It was about control. When a person relies on dominance to feel secure, they will eventually test whether the world still sees them as superior. Public humiliation is rarely an impulsive outburst. It is a calculated performance. It begins long before the actual event. It starts with subtle comments that sound like jokes, but land like warnings. It builds through private criticism that slowly trains you to doubt your own judgment. It culminates in a setting where other people are present, where the audience becomes part of the mechanism, and where your reaction is the real target. The goal is not to correct you. The goal is to lower you just enough to elevate them, to make you the problem so they never have to be. You felt it in your body before your mind could name it. The tightness in your throat, the sudden drop in your confidence, the quiet panic of knowing that whatever you say will be twisted, and whatever you do not say will be used against you. That is not weakness. That is the natural response to an engineered imbalance. You were not the issue. The imbalance was. The situation was built on a simple but heavy psychological truth. People who depend on external validation to maintain their sense of worth will often create environments where they can control how they are perceived. When that need grows fragile, they stop seeking connection and start seeking proof. Proof that they are above you. Proof that they are right. Proof that your quiet strength is actually submission. Public humiliation becomes the stage for that proof. It is not about truth. It is about theater. And you were handed a role you never auditioned for. The role of the flawed one, the overreactor, the person who cannot handle reasonable feedback. The moment you stepped into that space, the script was already written. Your confusion was the point. Your hesitation was the cue. Your silence was the victory they wanted to claim. Understanding why this happens removes the weight of personal failure. It is not that you were too sensitive. It is that the dynamic was never designed for mutual respect. It was designed for hierarchy. A person who feels internally unstable will often project that instability outward, using other people as mirrors to reflect a version of reality that keeps them in charge. When they plan a public moment of correction, embarrassment, or exposure, they are not trying to improve the relationship. They are trying to secure their position in it. They want witnesses because witnesses validate the performance. They want your discomfort because discomfort signals compliance. They want you to either break down or defend yourself loudly, because either reaction keeps the focus on you, and keeps them safely positioned as the reasonable one. That is the mechanism. It is quiet, it is deliberate, and it relies entirely on your belief that you are somehow responsible for the atmosphere. The impact on you is often invisible to everyone else. You carried the aftermath in your nervous system. You replayed the exchange until your thoughts blurred. You questioned whether you had misunderstood, whether you were too rigid, whether you should have laughed it off or walked away sooner. That questioning is exactly what the dynamic produces. It is not a reflection of your character. It is a reflection of how well the setup worked. When reality is carefully staged, the natural human response is to search for your own fault first. You do this because you are accustomed to taking responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. You do this because you believed that if you just understood the rules better, you could finally keep the peace. But the rules were written to keep you off balance. The peace was always conditional on your silence.
Recognizing this pattern does not require anger. It requires clarity. Clarity is quiet. It does not shout. It simply stops feeding the confusion. When you begin to see the structure for what it is, the emotional charge starts to fade. You notice how the comments were timed. You notice how the audience was carefully selected. You notice how your genuine attempts to connect were met with manufactured distance, only to be used later as evidence of your instability. Once you see the architecture, you stop trying to rearrange the furniture. You step back. You observe. You realize that the person orchestrating the moment was not operating from strength. They were operating from fear. Fear of being seen as ordinary. Fear of losing the narrative. Fear of facing their own emptiness without an audience to distract them. That fear is heavy, but it belongs to them. It never belonged to you. Stepping back emotionally is not the same as shutting down. It is the conscious decision to stop participating in a system that demands your confusion as currency. You begin to measure your worth by your own standards, instead of waiting for external confirmation. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what you are. You stop defending your reality to those who profit from distorting it. This shift is gradual. It happens in small moments. You pause before answering. You let silence sit instead of rushing to fill it. You decline invitations that feel like traps disguised as gatherings. You notice when your body tenses, and you choose to breathe instead of brace. You learn that detachment is not coldness. It is preservation. It is the quiet understanding that you do not have to prove your dignity to someone who relies on your discomfort to feel secure. The moment the planned humiliation backfires is rarely loud. It does not look like a dramatic confrontation or a public victory. It looks like a quiet refusal to play the assigned role. It looks like you sitting calmly while the script falls apart. It looks like you not reacting to the bait, not defending against the false accusation, not chasing the validation that was never going to be given. When the expected reaction does not arrive, the mechanism stalls. The person who built the stage suddenly has nowhere to direct the spotlight. The audience, deprived of the promised tension, begins to notice the imbalance themselves. They see the forced setup. They see the disproportionate response. They see the quiet person who is no longer participating in the performance. The control slips not because you fought back, but because you stopped feeding the illusion. The backfire is simply the natural result of removing your cooperation from a dynamic that required it to survive.
You will feel the shift in your own nervous system before you see it in theirs. The tightness in your chest loosens. The urge to explain yourself fades. The need to win the argument is replaced by the simple desire to protect your peace. This is where real empowerment begins. It is not found in clever comebacks or public corrections. It is found in the steady decision to no longer hand your emotional stability over to someone who treats it as disposable. You begin to set boundaries that are not announced, but lived. You stop attending events that demand you shrink. You stop answering messages that are designed to provoke rather than connect. You stop justifying your choices to people who have already decided you are wrong. You learn that self-respect is not a declaration. It is a daily practice of alignment. You align your time, your energy, and your attention with what actually sustains you, and you withdraw them from what systematically drains you. Calm detachment becomes your default because it is the only response that honors your reality. You no longer need to prove that you were hurt. You no longer need to prove that you were right. You simply know, and that knowing is enough. You understand now that manipulation thrives on engagement, and healing thrives on distance. You give yourself permission to step out of the arena entirely. You stop measuring your progress by how the other person reacts to your absence. You stop waiting for an apology that is not coming, and you stop punishing yourself for their refusal to see clearly. Closure does not arrive as a grand resolution. It arrives as a quiet recognition that you have already survived the hardest part. You survived the confusion. You survived the self-doubt. You survived the weight of carrying a narrative that was never yours to hold. And you are still standing. Not because you fought fire with fire, but because you learned how to step out of the room before the match was struck. Healing is not about forgetting what happened. It is about integrating the truth of it without letting it define you. You acknowledge the manipulation without letting it become your identity. You honor your exhaustion without letting it become your limit. You recognize the pattern without letting it dictate your future. The mind wants to return to the scene, to fix it, to rewrite it, to finally get the reaction that would make it all make sense. But the nervous system heals when the scene is left alone. You give yourself that space. You allow the memories to settle without chasing them. You let the questions fade without demanding answers that will never satisfy you. You focus on what is real, what is present, what is within your control. Your breath, your choices, your quiet moments of clarity, your growing ability to trust your own perception again. Trust returns slowly, but it does return. You begin to notice when you are reacting to the past instead of responding to the present. You catch yourself before you shrink to make someone else comfortable. You choose honesty over harmony when harmony requires your silence. You learn that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of alignment. You align with your values. You align with your boundaries. You align with the simple truth that you do not owe anyone your confusion. You do not owe anyone your exhaustion. You do not owe anyone the performance of your own diminishment. The more you live by that truth, the lighter you feel. The less you need to explain yourself, the more space you have
to actually live. There will be days when the memory resurfaces and the old doubt tries to creep back in. That is normal. It does not mean you are failing. It means you are processing. You handle it the same way you handle any passing weather. You observe it. You let it move through you. You do not build a house inside it. You return to what is steady. You return to your routine. You return to the people who do not require you to perform for their approval. You return to the version of yourself that existed before the setup, the one that knew how to breathe without bracing, how to speak without defending, how to exist without calculating the cost of your presence. That version of you was never gone. It was only buried under layers of manufactured guilt and redirected blame. You are uncovering it now, not through force, but through consistent, quiet refusal to participate in your own erasure. Moving forward does not require you to become hard. It requires you to become clear. Clarity is protective. It does not armor you against the world.
It simply shows you where you no longer need to walk. You learn to recognize the early signs of imbalance before they become heavy. You learn to trust the quiet warning in your body before your mind tries to talk you out of it. You learn that saying no is a complete sentence. You learn that walking away is not a failure. It is a declaration of self-respect. You stop waiting for permission to protect your energy. You stop asking for validation from sources that have consistently withheld it. You build a life that does not require you to negotiate your worth. You surround yourself with people who do not mistake your calmness for weakness, who do not interpret your boundaries as hostility, who do not confuse your silence with submission. You allow yourself to be seen without being tested. The backfire of their plan was never about your victory. It was about your awakening. It was the moment you realized that the only way to win a game designed for your loss is to stop playing. You did that. You stopped handing them your attention. You stopped feeding them your doubt. You stopped letting their narrative dictate your reality. The collapse of their performance was simply the natural result of your refusal to sustain it. You do not need to look back to confirm it worked. You already feel it. The quiet in your mind, the steadiness in your steps, the absence of the constant need to explain yourself. That is the proof. That is the closure. You are no longer trying to convince someone to see you clearly. You are finally seeing yourself clearly. And that changes everything. Healing continues in the small choices. Choosing rest over rumination. Choosing presence over performance. Choosing truth over tension. You will notice how your relationships shift when you stop carrying other people's instability. You will notice how your decisions become lighter when you stop weighing them against someone else's approval. You will notice how your voice sounds different when it is no longer filtered through fear of repercussion. This is not about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming grounded. It is about standing firmly in your own reality so that no one else's distortion can pull you off center. You have already done the hardest work. You looked at the confusion. You stayed with it long enough to see the pattern. You chose clarity over comfort. You chose peace over proof. And now you get to live in the space that truth creates. You do not need to announce your healing. You do not need to validate it to anyone who is part of the setup. You simply carry it forward. You move through your days with quiet confidence. You make choices that align with your well-being instead of your anxiety. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You allow yourself to speak without fear. You allow yourself to exist without calculating the emotional cost. The past was a lesson, not a life sentence. You have learned what you needed to learn. You have taken back what was always yours. Your clarity, your calm, your right to walk away from anything that demands your confusion. And as you continue forward, you will notice something simple but profound. You are no longer waiting for the storm to pass. You are finally standing in your own steady ground. And that is enough. It has always been enough. You are free to move forward, not because the past disappeared, but because you finally see it clearly, and you no longer need it to define you.